Hello, everybody. So here we are. Today is March 6th, Sunday. It's 2 p.m. So let's start with our program for today, which is we're going to have a special guest. It's Whispering Lines. It's our book club to talk about the crypto Jewish literature. And our guest today is Corinne Brown. And before we're going to start there, I want to start with some upcoming events that we have. Remember that I'm managing two computers here, so I apologize if you see me changing perspective. But please understand that we're dealing with technology. So Sephardic Heritage Institute was born at the beginning of this year with this new programming. So I want to invite you to please follow us and to be in contact with us. First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here today. We are broadcasting live on Facebook Live, and also I will put this video on YouTube on our channel on YouTube. What are our new programs coming up for this month? Remember that on Saturday, March 12th, I'm going to have a presentation for the New Mexico Genealogical Society on our research for Bartolomé Romero for the Portuguese citizenship. So I'm going to be talking about the historical documents that we have to support the Jewish identity and the family history in New Mexico. So that's on March 12th at 10 a.m. Saturday. If you are interested in watching this program, please register at the New Mexico Genealogical Society.org, nmgs.org, and you will get the link to attend the webinar. So that's one thing. Thank you. Next thing. On Wednesday, March 16, I'm planning to have what I think it's an interesting conversation talk about nobleza conversa. I'm going to travel to cover the first generation of Spanish explorers, conquerors, settlers, and how those people were given encomiendas, which is land grants, and how when the land grants were extinguished, and I will explain the historical context for all this, then they become nobility, because then what the king does is, in order to get money, all princes need money. So in order to get money, what the crown does is they sell nobility titles. So this is how we're going to follow from those conversos that happened in between 1381 to 1392, how all these people who converted and who jumped the Atlantic and participated in the conquest in the conquest of the Western Hemisphere, they become nobility. So that's going to be another thing. It's going to be on Facebook Live on Wednesday, March 16 at 2 p.m. It's going to be there for your pleasure to watch it at whenever is more convenient for you. So as normally, if you have any questions after watching it, please leave it there and I will try to answer them as fast as I can. Following that, on March 18, we're going to have our monthly meeting, Tiempo de Reflexión. Tiempo de Reflexión is a time when we meet once a month and we reflect on what has been going on for the last month. And clearly for this month, it's going to be a full agenda, I'm guessing, because with whatever we have going on in the world, we're going to need some time of reflection, sharing, and supporting each other on our thoughts and our fears about what's going on. So that's going to be Tiempo de Reflexión, a time to reflect, a time to think about ourselves and our relationship with the world. It's going to be March 18, Friday at 5:30. If you are interested, please register, send me an email, and I will send you the Zoom link. Following that, at the end of the month, we're going to be talking about between us. It's going to be the review of Hidden Star by Corinne Brown, our guest today. Also, it's going to be a private party. It's a private event. So if you want to participate on it, please email me and I will send you the link. And last but not least, next month. Next month is going to be a different type of book. We have talked about two novels. Now we're going to be talking about historical book. So I'm talking to Dr. Schnegert to trying to bring him into this conversation for him to discuss in this environment the anthology of religious poetry from the Mexican Inquisition trials in the 16th century, Crypto Jews, which is basically, most of it is going to be about the Carvajal family. So that's why I wanted to put everything together with Nobleza Conversa and also the Crypto Jews coming up this month, the anthology. So I think that that's going to be a nice combo for this month. So join us on April 3rd, again, Sunday, 2 p.m. Remember, we're going to change the times in our clocks on the 13th. So at 2 a.m. in the morning, it's going to be 3 a.m. So that's Sunday. So remember to put that in your calendar. You don't want to be like me, that one day I was late for a meeting. So say that. Please put in your schedule in your plans this book club on April 3rd at 2 p.m. So that's going to be an interesting thing. Also, please remember to stay in contact. We want to learn from you. We want to learn what's your interest, what you want to see, what type of programs you want to see more. So please follow us on Twitter. You can email us, or we're also on Facebook, so you can check us there on Facebook. So without more delay, today we want to introduce a very special person, Corinne Brown. And Corinne Brown, hi Corinne, how are you? Yeah, you have to unmute. I see you moving.
I'm unmuted.
Yay! So yes, I see you. Thank you very much.
Okay,
So
great.
let me stop the share so we're going to see everybody's face. And
Okay.
today we're talking about the book that you wrote.
Yes, indeed.
And it was awarded. It's a winner 2016. So that's very important. So we will talk about this. So Corinne wrote a book, The Hidden Star, that won several awards. How many awards did you win?
4 in all, but the significant ones are the New Mexico Arizona Book Award in historical fiction and the Latino Literacy Award in inspirational and historical fiction. Those were second place awards, but that was a huge international competition. So I was very grateful to even be in the lineup. It doesn't matter.
That's good. Hey.
Yeah.
So today we have this book. So if last month we talked about a book that has been used in high schools and it has a lot, it's very rich in terms of the materials that it brings, historical materials and everything. And it has to become, I mean, I think that what came out very clearly from our last meeting when we were reviewing the other book is that was a perfect book for a school, for school people, because it really, with the music and the historical, the huge amount of historical information, that's perfect for them. But today we are in front of a very interesting book that Corinne wrote. And first question, Corinne, you wrote a book about conversos, and your name is Corinne Joy Brown.
I'm not a converso. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. No. I'm not saying that you're not a converso. I'm asking, what's your relationship? Because don't judge never the book by the cover. So don't judge anybody by the family name. So yeah. So what's your relationship with something?
The story begins, my goodness, more than 20 years ago. when I was the board chair of Denver's Mizell Museum of Judaica. Today it's simply called the Mizell Museum. And it's an organization that looks at Jewish life and culture around the world. And I spent 3 terms or 10 years supervising programming and guest speakers. And when I discovered a lecture being given by Dr. Seth Ward at the Institute of Sephardic Studies at the University of Denver on
Hmm.
crypto Jews, I discovered a word, a topic, a culture I'd never heard of. And I enrolled in his institute, which were monthly meetings. And I began to meet people from as far away as Pueblo who were driving up to Denver to sit in on these courses, who had the most remarkable stories. People who told of their grandparents on their deathbed, revealing to the family that they were in fact Jews, not Catholics, the sort of things novels are made of. And it began a lifelong commitment to understanding more about the story of the conversos around the world. There's one more important link, which is that my parents escaped World War II in 1942 and left their families behind, most of whom who perished almost entirely. And following the war, an orphaned child who had been a hidden child was found in Poland and determined to be, without any doubt, the daughter of my father's sister. And great efforts were made to bring her into the United States. It took 2.5 years of legislative red tape, and she came to Denver 3 weeks before I was born. My blue-eyed, sandy-haired sister, who arrived still wearing the cross around her neck that saved her in many ways. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I discovered her history written by her own hand as a high schooler at Denver's East High School. And I discovered the truth of her story. And it was such a profound awakening for me that, one, the Holocaust was still not something I was deeply familiar with, but the idea that my sister survived by hiding behind another identity, posing as a Christian, in this case, a Catholic. And it took me another 15 years to process that as a budding writer, an emerging writer. And I came up with a story idea that turned into Hidden Star.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing this. Because the first question that I'm going to pop up here now, hearing that the story, is do you think, for our audience, do you think that converso is something that happens only in 1492, that it's a phenomenon that it's only Spain 1492 at the crossroad between medieval time and Renaissance? Or do you think that the converso is more like something that happens all across time and all across religions?
Well, of course, Rabbi, that goes without saying that the victims of persecution, wherever they are, who take on a hidden identity, it's a very old story and it's an ongoing story even in our time. And one of my purposes for telling the story the way I did, without dwelling specifically on medieval Europe, but rather focusing more on the present day, with the few flashbacks that guide the story back into time, was that I wanted to help people see that the idea of hiding or of an obscured identity is something that's part of our everyday life. In fact, I think it's one of the issues that makes this book palatable or relevant to a wider audience. In fact, you and I talked about this, that I've been amazed at who the readers are in the sale of this book and the audiences that have invited me to speak about it. And primarily, they're not Jewish audiences. And so I asked myself, what are the main elements that seem to be resonating with people of every walk of life? And that's one of them, is the question of secrecy and hiddenness.
Hmm.
And of course, the larger question of identity. Who are we and why are we here and who who were our forebears? Does it matter? And the other two, and maybe I'm way ahead of the topic, but is the idea of rebirth or the fact that we can become someone or something else once we take stock of our larger story, we evaluate what our roots are, and then that final idea of restitution or wholeness, that by doing so, we complete the circle. And in my 15 years of interviewing on Usim, this was a recurring subject, that by doing it for them, people who perished 400 or 500 years ago, I am thereby clearing the slate and making the world whole again. It's a really profound idea, but many people believe it's up to them.
Yeah, I mean that's
A long answer to a short question.
no,
I'm
no, no, no,
sorry.
no, because it's raising me the question that for when you go online, probably you, Corinne, you, Maria, you are part of the Society for Crypto-Jewish Studies, and other members of our audience. When I have done some research on crypto Judaism, I have realized that there is a lot of confusion about what it means as a historical event. But also another thing, when I do the tours on the and I lecture on crypto Judaism, one of the things that amazes me is how much interest is there, how much people want to know. And I don't know if you would agree with me that crypto Judaism has become like a metaphor for all those hidden identities.
For those who understand it and are familiar with it, certainly. And for those who don't, when they make that aha moment, the connection, they begin to see it in a new framework. And again, you and I talked about
Yes.
the fact that the idea of something hidden is related to the idea of secrecy. I mean, who doesn't have a skeleton in the closet or isn't willing to take another look at a family's history?
Yeah.
That's where the connections come in.
I remember now that you mentioned the skeleton in the closet. Who was Clinton's Secretary of State? Do you remember her? Female? Oh,
I
Madeleine
think,
Albright. Yes, thank you. I was able to
oh,
read your lips.
certainly, right.
I remember a New York Times, something like this, one of those vignettes when it came out that she was a Holocaust child, and that she was adopted when she was a toddler, so she had no memory of this, and that she had Jewish ancestry. And
Right.
the vignette was exactly this. Madeleine Albright opening the closet, and there was a skeleton in the closet. So that for me, that made me think a lot. That happened 2003, 2002. So I was already here, so it was on my first years of being in the States. So that really stuck in my mind because it was like, wow. I mean, it's what you say. I mean, everybody has a skeleton in the closet. How much we want to reveal, how much. So that leads into this other game of identities, if you want, in which we are in a period in American history that we have this hyphenized identity, and we decide how much, who, when, etc., how to open that closet and identify ourselves in the multiple layers of or the multiple identities that we have. So that's I don't know. I mean, you have
That's
talked to
an interesting point, Jordy, because for every individual case, it depends on what's at stake. There are those that still today in New Mexico, as you know, choose to keep their identity a very private matter. There's the
Mhm.
question of inclusion, or as I said to I'm currently doing a summary course for an adult education center on the crypto-Judaic experience. And the idea of belonging only really matters when push comes to shove, when how someone identifies you either makes you vulnerable or strong. I think it's interesting if you look at the question of Native America, how people will look at their bloodlines, and even if they're 1/16th um, Native American, they're entitled to certain privileges. If there's enough. So we look at this ambiguity, if you will, of identity and how it serves us. Love what you said, in a hyphenated world.
Yeah.
We're either African American or whatever,
Jewish
Latino
American, yes,
American.
correct.
Right.
So that reminds me, you said you use the word belonging. In Reconstructionism, Kaplan said there are three stages for a Jew to participate in the Jewish community. And in his mind, it was the three B's: belonging, behaving, and believing.
Mm.
So those three aspects, Kaplan argues that it's kind of a, if you belong, then when you have a sense of belonging, then you have a sense of behaving, and when you have a sense of behaving, this is going to lead you to a sense of believing. So for him was gradual. Um, do you see anything like this in the crypto Jewish world? Or what's this belonging self-identification? That's where I think that Kaplan falls short at this point, or does not any longer respond to reality, at least in the crypto Jewish world.
Well, as an outsider looking in, but also as the editor of a journal in which twice a year we take a look at 55 pages of personal narrative, family histories, birthright trips, academic research.
Hmm.
I am blessed to be privileged, at least, to have a look at some of the extraordinary movements within this awakening. And, I'm not the one to be able to answer your question clearly, but I think that for those that are making the move toward identification, they clearly see benefits to belonging. And I think that there's a redemptive quality happening all over the world, in the sense that museums are opening in Lisbon and in Madrid, honoring this history. It never existed before. But 20 years ago, people maybe still told you it never existed. So we're having a new evaluation of the Jewish history in the world, of the legacy that's been left and that was created by the Sephardim. And as Gitlitz pointed out, may he rest in peace, the greatest scholar who really spearheaded this research, there were three kinds of crypto Jews. There were those that converted totally and entered the Christian world and took positions in the Christian clergy. There we are. And there were those that converted but continued to practice Judaism in secret. And then there were those that resisted fully, who only went through the motions, but still strove to observe and practice daily. So there's no consistent definition of who that crypto Jew was.
Right. I really, as you saw, I have the book and I have it. It's one of my pieces that I have that at hand constantly. You mentioned a very interesting word, and now we're going to get more into Southwest history: cultural resistance.
Did I say that?
No, I'm putting
Sounds
the word.
interesting.
You say resistance, and I'm adding cultural. But
Oh,
yeah, I mean,
okay.
think in terms of that. I mean, I imagine I'm keeping in mind inquisitorial cases that I read back in Spain. And the impression that I have is one day those people woke up Jewish, they were baptized without any type of instruction, and then that night they go to bed Catholic. They had no adult education in order to be baptized. There was no personal commitment. It was just a mechanical thing that happened to them. They were totally passive spectators of their own lives, if you want. So that's why I'm using the cultural resistance, because it's a culture. I'm a Reconstructionist rabbi, so I see Judaism as a culture. I see Judaism as a set of values, practices, belief, literature, language, etc., etc. And then suddenly, one morning, you are conducted to the church, they baptize you, and then it's like, what do I do? I mean, what do I do with my? I don't even think that they had the idea of the my old me, another new me. So it's interesting then the mechanisms that we have for that cultural resistance. And being in the Southwest, you have two types of people who had cultural resistance. One coming from the South, meaning that group of people, and then the other people living already here. You know what I'm the
Are we
first
talking about the upper and lower Rio Grande, the
no,
colonial?
we're talking about 1598. You have the Indian pueblos, the
The
first the
initial
first yes,
conquest.
you have the I mean in the case of the Southwest, you have the Indian pueblos, you have the Navajos, you have those First Nations that were already
Right.
living here, and then you have those Spaniards coming up. I mean, I'm being very silly, but you have that group of settlers or Europeans coming up. Inside that group, you already have people who are trying to keep their identities or they have a cultural resistance. So one of the things that struck me in your book, and now I'm 5 pages ahead of my script, is this conversation that happens between indigenous nations and conversos. You have Navajos here, you
I have
have.
indeed.
So let's talk about your book. It's a very complex book. How long did it take for you to write?
Oh my God. It literally took about 15 years. And I will tell you why. Because there is a term thrown about in the world of literature and pop culture of appropriation, of taking on somebody else's essence and cultural manner and making it your own. And I did not want to be guilty of borrowing something I was not a part of and exploiting it for commercial purposes. I mean, art not necessarily exploitation, but I wanted to make very sure that I was on safe ground. And I went very slowly. The first person that I met who um, alluded me to the essence of this culture was Lorenzo Trujillo here in Denver,
Yes.
Colorado,
Yeah.
who's a 14th generation descendant and whose family of origin lives in a small town in northern New Mexico. And he was very encouraging for me to go forward with this. And then I discovered the summer on a scene conferences being held by Rabbi Leon. At that time, we're in partnership with, at least his coordinator was Sonia Loya. And I went for 3 summers in a row, meeting the locals in El Paso and the people coming to his weekend. They were Shabbatons. And I would sit around the table and talk to people informally about why they were there. And I discovered the many steps of the journey. There were people who were messianics. There were people who were already conversos, returnees. There were those that were skeptics, curiosity seekers. And I began to gather information and points of view. And the main thing I was interested in learning before I even set pen to paper was, what was the aha moment? What drove you this direction? And when did you finally turn your back on the church, the Trinity, uh, everything that is part of the catechism of Catholicism, and say, I'm done. And I'm moving back to who I was toward modern day Judaism. And this is not an easy thing to do because the larger Ashkenazi community doesn't understand this journey or who these people are. And I found them to be so courageous and the answers I was expecting to get, oh, I studied, I met Rabbi Leon, I went to classes. No, it was here. It was a gut reaction. There were people that said, my ancestors died for this reason, and I'm here because of them. It was so heartfelt. And when I took that story and combined it with my sister's story, meaning the fact that she too lost everything and came to a new world where she was adopted by family in America. She had no idea who my parents were. A very amazing story how she got here and how she started over. And it all really came together when I developed this character, my modern day character, and decided that the only way I could help her break free was in the style of Hermann Hesse and other writers that talk about the breakdown of the world as we know it, in which her world literally falls apart. And it frees her to move forward, to break out. And when her two children decide to hightail it on an adventure ride that turns into a nightmare, it begins the nexus of her journey outward and inward to find not only them, but who she is. And that journey, oddly enough, at the same time, a relative in our larger family hired one of the most sought after Jewish genealogists in America to tell the story of the Moscow family and another side of the family in California, and trace their roots all the way back to Poland. And when my parents died, they left me a trove of photographs, most of which were unmarked and ambiguous. Took a lot of sorting out to figure out who they were and when they were taken. And I became the archivist. During the 2 years that I really wrote this story, I was in constant communication with a genealogist who was tracing our family story. This was such serendipity that it was a phenomenal experience for me. And it brought me a lot closer to understanding who I was. I mean, I was almost living my character's journey, which I didn't share this part with you, but it was just a phenomenal experience for me. And I came out of it more appreciative of the Judaism that I inherited, being born in Denver, Colorado, miraculously, because both my parents got out of Nazi-occupied France. And, and to bring my character to making this choice, I had to bring her to the brink. You know, I needed her to decide to go forward based on something so precious to her that it would be a decision with no return. And it was asking for the salvation of her children. Finally, they find one, and then there's still one to go. And that's when she makes the deal with the God of Abraham, Isaac, the patriarch. And she says, I will be your daughter of Israel. Bring me back my child. Mm-hmm. And I felt that it had to be a matter of life or death. And I haven't had this conversation with Maria or Sonia, or I could name the dozen or so people that have made this journey that I respect and consider my friends and colleagues. But at some point, I believe it's a soul-changing, a life-changing decision. And that's what I wanted to portray in Hidden Star. And I also alluded to the hidden community. The fact that the state trooper, the police officer who starts in an official manner to become sort of her guide out of her nightmare, becomes a guide into the rest of her life. There's a love story there. And he alludes to the hidden community that she finally awakens to and realizes was there all along, right before her eyes, but that she never acknowledged. I'm ranting, I'm sorry.
No. It's very
long answer to another long answer.
But it's part of the question of how you come into this idea. So what I'm hearing you saying is, yes, there is this intellectual knowledge that I got about history, crypto Jews, etc., but then it resonates. It it touches a string inside yourself that talks about your family, and this is the collision of those two ideas.
Right, I had a deeply personal connection to this,
and
then
that
I met
creates a book.
right. And then I never stopped asking. I'll never forget Michael Acuna, who lives in Pueblo, who
Hmm.
was a very late returnee in his life, 50s or 60s, uh, was speaking at a mini conference created by Roger Martinez de Avila in Colorado Springs. And there we were during lunch. And I said to him, you know, how did you come about this? What was your story? And he said, it was like an awakening. He said, once I realized that was the only way forward, was to be, I wanted to be Jewish. And he said, I never looked back. I walked out that church door, and that was it. And it was like, that's like literally being reborn into a new world. It's almost like science fiction to me because we inherit stories, we inherit values. And I think to go back to what you said 15 minutes ago about the overnight baptism, today you are a Catholic. What was most sacred to the Jew and what has kept us alive for millennia is the generation to generation disbursement of our culture, Lador Vador, that we keep it going from parent to child. And the stories regenerate and the traditions are reborn and reinterpreted. And without that, we are surely a dying people. And that is the miracle in the crypto story, is how these things stayed alive. And, you know, I have the backstories are all hinged to an artifact that's part of Jewish tradition. So each little backstory is ignited by something in that box. And
Exactly.
my favorite one is the silversmith who comes out of Amsterdam, who work in New Amsterdam, and he hears the call to the West, which was being explored by the Dutch West Indies Company, who were trapping the beaver and the otter and bringing the furs back to Europe. And I dared turn him into an adventurer and an explorer who finds his way into the northernmost empire of New Spain, still territorial Nueva España,
Hmm.
and he ends up in Santa Fe. And he finds this descendant family. They've already been there 200 years. And he sits down to their table and hears them say grace to Dio, not Dios, not to the Trinity, but to one God. And that was his clue that he was among his people. And by the way, I've now launched into a deep study on the American fur trade, which, by the way, is overshadowed by the French and the Scottish and the English. And if you read all the frontier literature, you know, they're all named Monsieur McVeton or the Scottish MacDonald. And
Yeah, Jacques Cartier. Yeah, all
I'm
these
going to
people.
tell you, there had to have been Portuguese
Yeah.
crypto Jews who were part of this expansion. Certainly on the shipping end, in mercantile, in the business of turning those furs into top hats and coats and whatever. And so when we have our next society conference, I'm hoping to give a lecture on the fur trade and the Jewish part of it. I think I told you I've done some investigating into the crypto Jewish roots of the American cowboy.
Yep.
Because now that we know that 1 out of 4 Spanish colonialists was descended, we know that those settlers that built the ranchos and the villages and went into the silver trade in the north, in Zacatecas and Leon, they were our people.
Yep.
So what did they give to this culture that, by the way, since I wrote about cowboys for 20 years for 5 magazines, it's a heavily Christian culture, which, you know, cowboy church, every rodeo, Sunday morning, nobody ever would believe there was such a thing as a Jewish cowboy. Guess what? There was.
Yeah. So Stan writes about Jewish pirates. Corinne
Right.
writes
Right.
about Jewish
Well,
cowboys.
I presented this theory to Stanley Hortis when he gave a speech in Denver 20 years ago.
Uh,
And I said, what struck me was I was in one of the medieval synagogues in Venice, Italy, that are
mhm.
3 floors above the little, if you've ever been to the ghetto of Venice, and incredibly, it's all still very well preserved. And there were leather panels on the wall in the synagogue, carved in floral motifs,
Hmm.
leaves and flowers of great intricacy. And having been tied to the cowboy culture of the West, that's a whole other story, but I'm very familiar with saddle carving patterns. And these floral motifs looked exactly the same to me. So I asked Stanley, do you think that some of those early saddle carvers might have come out of the leather trade? Because the Jews were the leather makers in the medieval period, before, during the Ottoman period, because the Turks would not handle the cleaning of leather because it involved uric acid or urine and it would defile them. So the Jews were the leather makers and they became gifted gear makers, saddles and bridles. And we have great records of that. And so Stanley looked at me and he said, "Show me the smoking gun." And that's exactly what I did. I spent the next 10 years looking at every aspect of cowboy culture and tracing it back to its roots. And I can tell you there's a group in Southern California called the Californios who still train horses and raise cattle in the manner of the Spanish colonial settlers of the 1500s.
Yep.
And they are a completely different breed of cowboy. And they can thank their Jewish roots for that. So
Good. Hey, no, no, no,
off
no.
the topic, but it's all related. So,
So, no, it's very interesting because what we have here is there is the public versus the private. The public face that you give, and then it's what happens inside. Um, Frontier life has clearly those two elements. There is a high degree of privacy, but when you are in a group, you have to behave like anybody else in the group. But whatever
right.
I'm doing in my rancho, what we're doing in my whatever I'm doing in my tent, my business, not yours.
So let me ask you a question. What do you think was the real purpose of the morada, of the penitentes?
Okay, the topic of the penitentes is a very interesting one. For me, I this is totally off the topic, so I apologize to this.
Well, I
But
wanted to relate because there is one writer in Denver who has been created quite a storm with his theory, which
mhm,
is that the penitentes went into those windowless adobes to
mhm.
chant in Hebrew. That's what he believes, that they were secretly maintaining their Jewish faith.
Okay, so this is my take. When the penitentes appear, point number one, you need to remember that the what we call the spiritual conquest, I don't like the term, but what we call the spiritual conquest is led by Franciscans. Franciscans have the tertiary order. The tertiary order are like oblates in the Benedictines. Those are people who are very committed, and it's not a religious degrees or religious commitment, but you are very close to that commitment. So you make a commitment to the community. So then you have those tertiary elements there, the Franciscan tertiaries. So that includes a spiritual practice by itself. Then, when you look at the history, the penitentes are very clearly in power, so to speak, during the period of transition between the end of the colonial period and the territorial period. I see this as a collision of three elements there. The penitentes become kind of the leaders of the town. You have a lack of official power during the War of Independence, the Mexican War of Independence, 1810. Grito de Dolores is 1810 to 1821, and then for the 30 years of the Mexican Republic, New Mexico is kind of a forgotten, so you need to have someone in power. So there is a vacuum. The penitentes come out there. Also, the model matches very much what you have also in traditional pueblos as a body of government, of governance, self-governance. So you have the elders, so to speak, gathering and resolving the issues that you can have. And also you have the element, why not the kiva? I mean, why to look into that? I mean, I could argue also that the La Morada represents kind of the same like the kiva. In the kiva, you have, it's a windowless, it's an enclosed uh, place, and you carry on social activities, but also religious activities. So you have those, the collision of those two elements. It's a traditional
Can
way
I
to.
interrupt you for a
Yeah, go
moment?
ahead.
Because this definition is the public and accepted and legitimate historical. I agree with you totally. I
Mhm.
understand. And the role of the Franciscans really kept the church alive until the Spanish American War, separation of church and state. Once Texas and New Mexico became states, things began to change radically. An article in the latest Holopede was written by Dr. Carlos Larralde. I don't know if
Yes.
you know him. He's a retired professor now. But I found it one of the most interesting articles we've ever received, which is about the role of the curandera,
Yeah,
the
that's a
the
different. Yeah.
spirit, right? And that's sort of a grassroots, mystical. These were people that minded the medical and spiritual lives of the settlers, told them what to eat, what not to eat, and that he believes many of them were cryptos who were in that way keeping their people on a straight line.
Yes, I
That
agree with
reminded
that.
me, I'm in a book club in Denver that I helped found 30 years ago. Can you imagine? We've been going, we read Bless Me Ultima by Adolfo
Yes.
Anaya, the book that launched the Latino literary movement. And here we have a character that in every way sort of exemplifies secrecy and ritual and guide mentorship. And I find that we have yet really fully understood how the crypto Jew assimilated into the multicultural Spanish Indio Catholic fabric of Texas and New Mexico and Arizona.
I'm reacting to the word assimilation
Oh,
because
okay.
I don't think that what happens here, and this is what I find fascinating in New Mexico, and this is probably what resonates so much inside myself, is that it's not an assimilation, is putting together, and again, going back to your book, and I say that in our personal conversation, it's putting together elements, different elements, and making a new culture, new
Aha.
Mexican culture.
Yes.
It's there is a difference between in I thought God I thought when I teach anthropology and religion and all these topics, one of the questions is what's assimilation, what's syncretism, what so in this case I would say this is a melting pot. This is a America avant la lettre. This is a melting pot where you have three people, three groups of three human groups coming together and creating a culture that is each one fits on the other. So the
Right.
three elements here in this culture in New Mexico, they are like the three legs in the stool. I mean, the table holds there. You have the element of secrecy. You have the link with the land. You have the official type of governance. For instance, think about uh, when the Spaniards come. Yeah, we have a pay and we have the Pueblo revolt, but there is one thing that Pueblos will not give up. It's cereals because it guarantees you not one crop but two crops a year. So it's advantageous for you. First crop is around May, if I remember my calendar correctly. I grew up in a rural area, so I remember that now during February, now the corn would begin to sprout out, and in June you would be collecting the corn.
Rabbi Jordy, let me interrupt you for a minute because if we have to end in 10 minutes, I'm
Oh,
hoping we can take a look at those
yes,
illustrations.
yes, correct. Let me share your illustrations. I have them here because one question for you, the audience, one question that I had for her was, what problems have you encountered during the
Ah,
creation of the book? And I emphasize the idea that the book is a mosaic of different pieces. So then it's when Corinne says, "Oh, but I created this kind of quills as a response to a blockage that a creative blockage that you had." So panel number one.
right. So midway, as I said, it took me about 15 years to write this little book, one draft after another, throwing out, rewriting, revisiting, interviewing the director of the FBI for the state of New Mexico, interviewing a real Navajo Indian to find out if I got that character right and all the language correct and everything. Finally, I decided I needed to see these characters visually. So I learned this technique of making these wall hangings on canvas. And just for scale, this piece is about 18 by 24. And in the
Wow.
center is a picture of Rebecca, our the opening character, the great grandmother of Rachel. And up in the upper right hand corner, you see her in a wedding dress of the period. The year was 1806, that wedding. Over in the left hand corner is a senior moment, painted, help me out, Jordy, the classic New
The
Mexican,
retablo.
thank you, retablo of Santa Teresa. In the lower left-hand corner is a photograph of her father with his second wife, the one who really had no time for her. And over to the right, you see a cross made of marquisite, which is a sort of Spanish style way of making jewelry.
Yeah, colonial, yes.
Thank you. And a rosette in fabric, which is sort of unfolding. The rosette is still hiding its center like a flower. And so this journey has just barely begun from the cross to the star. And in the corner is a torn piece of paper from her diary. And written in Spanish are the words, do not speak much, for the walls have ears, which was something I felt would have been a advisement that the aunts and members of the community would have always told one another to be silent about what mattered. At the top, we have a concho, a silver concho, and a piece of serape fabric.
Hmm.
So this was supposed to reflect and represent that early early 1800s era of Spanish colonial New Mexico. And that helped me. By the way, I just found all these images on the internet and I
Oh,
printed
so
them out.
so those are random people that you found on the
Right.
internet.
And I used a system whereby you print them on transfer paper and
Yeah.
you iron them onto linen and they
Yes.
become sublimated into the fabric. And then they have their own glossy cover. And unfortunately, this one is a little bright, so you can't quite see the details, but that's how
Okay,
those are done.
that's very nice. So you want to go to the next one?
Yes, please.
So this is Rebecca. So the next one is a saint.
Yes. So for
That
those
was
of you
something that
that,
surprised me in the book. Yes.
yes, who are watching, the story of Santa Teresa is a remarkable one, not to be confused with another Santa Teresa who was French, who came 2 centuries later. So if you're going to do any research, this particular woman was born in a Jewish converso family and entered into a convent as a young child, 9 or 10 years old, and became one of the most significant contributors to the canon of original thinking and philosophical thought, and created an order of nuns that followed her throughout all of Catholic history. And she was canonized in 1640, and frankly, was an astonishing inspiration to me. And I happened to find another portrait of her by accident when I was a 13-year-old girl in the garage of my grandfather who had passed away. It's a long story, but he used to pick up frames at the Goodwill. And while my parents were settling the effects after he died with his children. He was a second grandfather. I found this image in his garage, a tapestry, a needlepoint of a saint. And I have to tell you, I loved it so much. I took it with me to college. There was this Jewish girl at Boston University who had a framed picture of a saint. Well, I came only to understand when I started this book and looked up, I looked up convents in New Mexico, 19th century, 20th century. And what came up was a convent dedicated to this saint. And there was this portrait. And I discovered that it was exactly the same as the little needlepoint I'd had for 40 years.
Yep.
And St. Teresa is always depicted with a bird over her shoulder, a dove of peace.
Yep.
She is the patron saint of writers. And in the tapestry that I have, the little needlepoint, she's holding a chalice with a snake coming out of it, which is the temptation of the devil, which she was able to resist. And down below, I have a saying by her, which I cannot read on this screen.
Remember, if you want to make progress on the path and ascend to the place you have longed for, the important thing is not to think much, but to love much. And therefore, to do whatever best awakens you to love.
Yes, awakens you to love.
Mm-hmm.
This is a remarkable insight from a woman with such deep feelings.
Yeah.
And here we have a symbol of the Spanish monarchy on the right, the cross above. But if you see to the right of the red fringes, a small shimmering Star of David.
Yep. Yep. So, yeah, the quote in Spanish, it's about prayer. And she says, that's in the book of her life, which is very interesting to read. I highly recommend it. It says, rezar no es pensar mucho o hablar mucho, sino en amar mucho. Por lo tanto, aquello que más os llevare a amar, eso haced.
Ay, qué bueno.
So yeah, that's a quote from her. And yeah, she is from converso background. When the grandparents converted, her father was like about 5 or 6 years old. So that's how we know. And the brother, they were 9 children, and the couple of brothers came across the Atlantic and participated in the conquest of Peru and Ecuador. So there is a branch of the Cepeda family who go back to Saint Teresa of Avila.
Gracias for this extra information.
Yeah, I mean, you know that it's one of my favorite too. I mean, it's very interesting.
Wow.
So, okay, I'm gonna stop there. Third panel. Abravanel, another one that is very interesting. So you tell me, why did you choose this one?
Okay,
and the
so
pictures.
This relates
to
the story of the young silversmith who comes to the New World. And the upper panel shows actual Dutch ships. It's an etching from the 18th century showing the many sailing ships that came to the New World. The lower panel is from a book on immigrant American Jews, and it's from 1890. And you can't see it very clearly, but these are Jewish immigrants coming to America, laying on the deck in steerage class with their blankets and their food and their one on top of the other on the ship. You can see the ropes of the ship in the back coming to the New World. The belt buckle is to represent the moon on this fabric that had the stars and the planets and sailing by day and by night. And this short flashback is a love story between a young girl and the silversmith who she wants to follow to the New World. She is in love and she believes that together they can make a new life. Malca de Loya is how I named her, and the date is 1654. And on the lower right, we have a ship's steering wheel with the tattered remnants of a sail. So this was just a flashback that helped us relate to this moving story. Unfortunately, she catches a disease, typhus or dysentery on the ship and dies on arrival, leaving him to go his own way and to become the adventurer that he became. So,
So kind of the Titanic story, but different also.
yes.
You also have her like singing.
No, but that's another story.
Yeah, I know. Uh, that's really that was a very interesting topic because it made me think a lot. I mean, that those three, the pictures and the combination, that was a lot of thought there. Uh, Panel number 4.
So this piece was my attempt to come to terms with the second to last chapter in the book, or the last chapter, in which this is an actual etching by
Oh yeah,
Goya
yes.
of the Inquisition of one of the sister of Carvajal, who was stripped and forced to plead for her life before the council of inquisitors who were in no way moved by her plight. And everything in this panel is very symbolic. The red flames reaching up in the background are torching the edges of this torn piece of the Edict of Expulsion, which that's actually a copy of a section of that proclamation, which I actually saw a version of at the exhibition in Santa Fe, Fractured Faiths, in which there was one of the 7 copies preserved for the world to see. And it's written in Catalonian Spanish. And to the left is again the cross representing the monarchy of Spain and the church. And their wealth with the gold brocade. And as we come down to the crown, which is at the bottom, because in my mind, this was already the beginning of the end. I mean, we were just on the edge of the age of exploration, but I believe that Spain was doomed. And this torn piece of paper is from the scribe's journal, in which he states that even though you might read that in a moment, but I want to point out, if everyone can see the fabric, that is 2 spears pointing to the Star of David.
Yes.
And that's actually a real piece of fabric that repeats this motif across a 36-inch wide.
Wow.
I mean, I'm in the design trade, and I happened to find this fabric at Denver's Design Center, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't understand what textile mill would even create a design like this. And I just cut a small piece of it to indicate the squeeze, the punishment, the terror of these weapons against the Jewish people. And so, Jordy, if you can read that lower right hand.
Okay, I'm not a spring chicken anymore, so now I'm giving up.
Oh, well, I
So
could just, never mind.
let it be written in the Holy Book. So far, so good, right? That
Yes.
Doña Maria Velázquez confessed to Judaizing. She will hear the penalty of her sins
She
and
will
be
bear the
cleansed.
penalty. Bear the penalty.
Oh,
He said.
she will bear the penalty of her sins and be cleaned in the name
Cleansed.
of the church. Both her
Oh,
be, I don't know. I cannot read that. Be
both her
banished.
boys are
Oh,
banished.
banished in
To,
exile, but
right.
they will live.
But they will live.
Yeah,
And of course, that's how her Bible got to the New World, was through them.
correct. And this is
Thank you.
and that piece of text is promoted by the Royal College of Ophthalmologists, right?
Yes. Thank you. I realize I have 2 screens up. I should have
Yeah,
looked at the
no,
larger
remember
version.
I have two also.
Okay.
So,
And this is the big
and this
finish.
is Correct. Go ahead.
So these are the characters that really carry the book from beginning to end.
And
And I have to tell you, whoever they are, and if they've tuned in today, I apologize for taking your images and making them into my characters because I loved Rachel and her youth and hopefulness. I love the way she's looking up. And her 12-year-old son, Angel, the rebel, and her little 7-year-old,
Pinto.
Juan or Pinto. And above is the old adobe that they inherited from her family, the 200-year-old building with the secrets in the walls.
Yep.
And on the right are the silver candlesticks with the rope silver around the bottom
Mm-hmm.
that were in the wooden box. And above, you see a wooden ornament that was part of I described that the lintel around the doorway was covered with carved wood in floral designs. And this is a piece of that.
Yep.
And again, we have this journey from the cross to the star. And here it is not encumbered by any weapons or anything sad. We have sort of the whimsy or the frivolity of these three hanging, I don't know what they are, fruits of the world. And at the bottom, which is very hard to see, there's a silver dove on the
Yes.
very bottom.
Between the two
And
flowers.
right, and the two flowers, which sort of indicate a forward-moving new world full of hope and growth.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you see again echoes of the first panel. So we have the colors of Mexico, the red and the green and the yellow, and we have the lace curtains that were sort of expressed in the early one. And altogether, this experience, which took me about 3 weeks to make these panels, I have one more, but I didn't include it, which was Our Lady of Guadalupe.
What?
Which
You're not proud of that?
I am, but it doesn't really appear in the book. But I never used a sewing machine before. So I found this wonderful handkerchief with Our Lady of Guadalupe printed on it with roses.
Mm-hmm.
And I did this many layered tapestry. It's really beautiful. But I couldn't, it's sort of an underlying theme because now that I've learned something about that, that image is sort of the mother of all mothers and is a very universal image. But I taught myself how to do this technique and how to use this darn sewing machine. And it was like an epiphany. This whole process sort of launched me to finish the book because I was sort of stuck in the middle.
Sometimes, okay, so I'm an artist too. What I do is printing, etching, all these kind of things. So sometimes this is what I say. You have to learn the techniques, and only when you have learned them, you're allowed to break them and to create
Right?
something new. The rules are there to be broken at the end
That's
and to
right.
create something new. So I really love the fact that you took that challenge of learning how to use a sewing machine. Uh, Me either. I don't know how to use one of. I don't know how to use one of those. One day I have to learn, and that you took that challenge on yourself. Also, I love the idea of the Adobe Casita because this is also our logo. It represents
Oh, that's right.
that place, ancestry that we inherit from our ancestors 200 years. The other day I was talking to a neighbor who had the house for 140 years,
Yes.
across the Napoleon house. So
So it's
yeah, I
a
was
perfect place to end
yeah.
because I'm bringing you back to the beginning.
Okay.
And I'm
Before that, I want to talk for 1 second about boxes.
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 Okay.
Boxes. They keep secrets, right? So
Yes.
this is a commonality that we have in crypto-Jewish narratives.
Wow.
My family had a box. A wooden box, a tin box, some sort of box that we buried somewhere in the desert here in New Mexico. So go and find it. And we had our thing. There is a story when I did Latin American Jewish literature, there is a story that I like to use, which is the silver samovar. The
Mhm.
silver samovar that my family had. That's a story. And that
Mhm.
silver samovar, you know the samovars, the
Sure.
Russian for the Russian tea. What happens at the end of the story is that the samovar never existed, but it was a wonderful excuse to talk about how the samovar, the non-existing samovar, went from great grandparents to the grandparents to my parents, and now we came into Argentina, and the samovar is lost, and we don't know who in the family has it in the house. So when I read the book, the wooden box. In another book that we're working here, it's memoirs of someone who passed away and left us the memoirs. So we're working on that. She talks about a tin box that they had some Jewish elements and they buried that in the desert down there in Los Lunas. Now go and find it. Um, what's about boxes and crypto Judaism? And the elements, the samovars. You know, in your case, you have an object that they open the box, they found, or she finds it, and she says, "Oh, what's this? What is this doing
Well,
here?"
I think the whole idea of containment and preservation and compression, in a sense, that all of this history travels with us one way or another. And if we can find a way, I think of lots of myths and stories. If it's Aladdin's lamp or Pandora's box, wherever there is a vessel that can hold memories and uh, traditions, we make of it what we will once the box is opened. But it has to start with that preservation. You can you can think of the pyramids as a giant box. I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
this is an age-old idea. What I'm saying is the idea of containing a life in a cubicle is a metaphoric way of expressing so much. And for me, I mean, frankly, I think I told you this, that my inspiration for the structure of this book, which is certainly nothing original, was based on seeing the film The Red Violin,
Oh, yes.
which the violin was not in a box, but when it was presented at the auction at Sotheby's, it was in a cubicle, and it's stolen before it's even able to come to the audience for bidding. And that launches a story that moves forward in time and backward in time in the same film. And I found it so engaging as we saw the journey of the violin going backwards from Maoist China to a European antique dealer, all the way to the source of when the violin was made. And that concept to me, in fact, I've gotten, if you look at the reader's remarks on Amazon, several people shortchanged this book and said very critically, we were looking for more information about the Inquisition. This wasn't historical enough. And it sort of pains me that they really missed the whole point. There are lots of books, if you want the history, both fiction and nonfiction, that can take you blow by blow through the timeline. I was interested in the transference of a soul, of a person reevaluating their life, taking a look back at all the customs and traditions that suddenly took on new meaning, and asking herself whether or not that was substance enough to take that leap of faith into a new world.
Hmm.
And of course, there was the love of her life waiting to catch her, so to speak. Lots of people have asked me if there's going to be a sequel. And I said, in your own mind. I mean, I don't need to write one. I think that the story tells itself where they might go.
Well,
Although I already figured out what the first page would be like if there was one, but I'm not going to tell you today. just
Okay, so thank you.
oh,
And before we're going to close and go into questions, if Shelly's hearing me, so so Shelly's still
we
with you
lost
there.
Shelley.
Yeah, Shelly has been in and out here and there. She's having problems with the computer. So let me ask you, I like to end these type of interviews with what does converse means to you? Because it's a very complex, as we said at the beginning, it's a very complex, multifaceted word. So how would you, what it means to you, converse, especially for you
Well,
because you come from this background.
okay, I'm not a religiously trained person who
It's
spent
for
a lot of
Corinne,
time.
Corinne's definition.
Okay, I believe that it means hope, and that when I discovered the two lines in Obadiah, that the exiles will return, I truly believe that this is what it refers to, that there is hope that the Jewish people will reunite and be strong as they were and as they can be.
Hmm.
I think that the conversos represent the best in us, the courage and the commitment. And I also have come to appreciate the culture that preceded the 20th century. You know, Jewish culture in America has been eclipsed by the Holocaust. It seems to have framed who we are, and the waves of Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe have defined Jews in America.
Hmm.
I mean, I grew up on the backs of early black and white TV and all the early Jewish comics. And now,
Impossible, you're 25.
excuse me?
Impossible, you are 25.
Right. So don't forget, I mean, I saw the first television. I'm 73 and I grew up in the 50s. And my understanding of Judaism was completely framed by an Ashkenazic world.
Hmm.
And I have been utterly re it's a whole new world for me. The more I study about the Converso history, the more I learn, layer after layer after layer. I think it's the richest part of Jewish history, the Spanish Sephardic story,
Hmm.
and it has to be told worldwide. And as I said on the very last page of this book was sort of my bid for world peace, in that it doesn't matter which side you fall on or whether you think the Messiah came or didn't. We all want the best for ourselves and our children, you know,
Amen.
peace in the world. But in truth, I really want the world to know this story and cherish it. I think it's the greatest story never told. And I think that the word converso is yet to be truly defined for what it is. I can't define it, but that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
thank you.
So
What a
thank
great
you.
discussion. I'm
Wait. Now,
delighted.
Shelley, now you're back into the fifth dimension.
She there?
Yes, she's trying to unmute herself.
Okay.
Yes, you want me to ask you to unmute? Ask her to unmute. Not working. I'm so sorry. Wait, try again. Now she's muted. Okay. So I'm sorry for the technical problems that we have today. If someone is from Best Buy, please, we take donations for Shelly new computer. So please, people from Best Buy, the executive director from Best Buy, if you want to please give her a new computer. She's our Facebook maven. So, okay. Unfortunately, I cannot be in both places. So, Shelly, could you type questions? Are there any questions? Okay, there are no questions. Okay, so thank you
Okay,
very much.
fair enough.
So let's conclude here. Thank you very much, everybody, for
Thank you,
watching
Rabbi
us.
Jordy.
And I really encourage you to get the book. Ta-da! It's an awesome novel. it's full of bits and pieces that make you think.
Nicely said.
Something that Corinne will never do for you is to unfold the story. She will keep the mystery. So this book is like a mini skirt, like what I said the other day.
Ah,
It's short, fitted, and open to the mystery.
ah,
It never reveals what you're saying. It's up to the and that's something that came out the other day during the conversation. A book is never finished until you, the reader, read it. Until then,
bravo.
the book is still an unfinished work. So I encourage you to participate, helping Corinne to finish to write the book by reading it.
Jordy,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just sold a new novel last week. So if anybody likes my work, check in on my website. It won't be out
Okay.
for another year, but I had
Ding
to
ding
throw
ding
that in.
ding 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 ding. Promotion.
Sorry.
And also talking about promotion, remember that we will be online for our upcoming programs. So yeah,
I'll be there.
Saturday 12 and log into Corinne's website. So thank you very much once again, everybody, for watching us and watching um, our little group here talking about crypto-Jewish the literature, whispering lines. Thank you very much. So I'm going to conclude
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you so much.
you're more than welcome. Thank you. And thank you for participating in this. 1 second. Papa.
Oh,
Let's see. I'm controlling here. Okay.
are we done?
Yay, we done. Yes, we're done. Good.
Okay. You were
Oh
great.
boy. So
Thank you
Oh,
Shelly,
so
you are
much.
muted. I cannot believe you. You
Oh,
have no voice.
who?
Shelly.
Maria? Oh,
Shelly
I
cannot
am muted.
talk. No, no,
Um,
no. What I'm saying is that Shelly cannot talk now, so we can
oh,
talk. Oh, she's helpless. Yeah, exactly. Oh, remember
okay.
that I'm recording now. This, so you're gonna be on YouTube doing that.
Corinne, again, you have been a voice